Imagine this. You're a peasant in 13th century Europe. Your feet are blistered, your stomach is empty, and night is falling fast. There's no inn, no GPS, no warm bed waiting. It's just you, a sack of onions, and the looming question. Where do you sleep tonight? Or picture the glittering court of Henry VIII, where a man's codpiece could be bigger than his ego, and wearing the wrong color could get you fined. Or worse, socially ruined. And then, step into the heart of medieval Cairo or Baghdad, where the air is thick with the scent of saffron and frankincense. The sound of storytellers echoes between stalls, and the marketplace isn't just a place to shop. It's where empires meet, ideas collide, and an entire civilization comes alive. Tonight we're diving deep into three extraordinary worlds that shaped the medieval experience. The desperate reality of the traveling peasant, the dazzling, rule-bound spectacle of Tudor fashion, and the vibrant, beating heart of the Arab Bazaar. A true crossroads of the world. This isn't just history, it's survival, power, identity. It's the smell of hay and holiness, the weight of a jeweled gown, and the sound of 1,000 voices bargaining under the desert sun. So before you get comfortable, and trust me, after tonight, you'll really appreciate your mattress. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, from midnight in Tokyo to early morning in Toronto. All right, lights down. Let's begin. Section 1. The realities of travel and shelter for poor peasants in medieval Europe. Imagine you're a poor peasant in the Middle Ages. You've just walked for 3 days with nothing but a sack of onions, a ragged cloak, and the growing suspicion that every goose in England hates you. Your feet are blistered, your stomach is hollow, and night is falling fast. You're miles from home, you have no coin, and the only inn you passed laughed at your empty purse. So now, as the wind howls and the first cold drops of rain begin to fall, you face a very real, very urgent question. Where do you sleep tonight? Let's start with the barn, the medieval peasant's 5-star hotel. If you're lucky enough to find a farmer who, dose and tea, immediately chase you off with a pitchfork. A barn offers a roof, some straw, and the comforting warmth of livestock. Cows, chickens, and the occasional judgmental ox become your roommates. It's not exactly clean. The smell is a complex blend of hay, manure, and existential dread. And if a pig decides you're encroaching on its personal space, you might wake up missing a boot. But compared to the alternatives, this is luxury. Be warm, dry, and maybe even get a crust of bread in the morning. Just don't roll over. That cow might not appreciate it. But what if the barn door is locked? What if the farmer's dog is trained to hate your face? Then you're left with sleeping outdoors, the original roughing it. In a field, you might find a patch of grass, assuming it's not already claimed by cow dung or thistles. If you're smart, you stay near the edge, so you, Dan T, get trampled by livestock or accused of trespassing by a man named Godric with a very sharp scythe. Forests are another option. Quiet, dark, and absolutely terrifying. Every snapped twig sounds like a bandit. Every owl hoot feels like a personal insult. And let's not forget the wolves, the cold, and the creeping sense that Satan himself might be watching from the shadows. But if you survive the night, you can tell people you communed with nature, though you probably just passed out from exhaustion. If the open air feels too risky, you might try the churchyard. It's public, semi-sanctified, and the dead are famously bad at complaining. Sleeping among graves offers a strange kind of safety. Bandits might think twice about robbing someone within sneezing distance of a saint's relic. Some churches even have lich gates, sheltered porches where you can curl up relatively dry. And if you look tragic enough, a kind priest might offer you soup and a lecture on sin. But don't get too comfortable. A furious monk with a broom could kick you out at dawn, and let us be honest. Sleeping on top of someone else's grave is a hard sell as peaceful rest. When all else fails, there's the monastery. The medieval equivalent of a hostel run by monks who've taken vows of silence, poverty, and judging you silently. You don't just walk in, you wait at the gate, often for hours, until a monk decides you're not a heretic, a thief, or worse, a talkative heretic. If you're admitted, you get bread, watery soup, and a floor to sleep on. The catch? You'll be woken at 3 a.m. by Gregorian chants that sound like monks arguing with bees. No one asks for money, but they do expect you to behave. No stealing, no blasphemy, and definitely no snoring too loud. It's not comfortable, but it's dry, quiet, and comes with just enough guilt to keep you humble. Then there are the roadside shrines, little stone or wooden structures at crossroads, often holding a statue of a saint or a piece of someone's toe bone. For a weary traveler, these become sacred snooze booths. They don't offer food or bedding, but they do provide just enough cover to stay out of the rain. And if someone finds you asleep at the foot of St. Mildred, you can always claim you were praying loudly in your sleep. Bonus: bandits avoid shrines. Bad luck, you see. Even if St. Hubert doesn't protect you from trenchfoot or aggressive squirrels, there's a faint sense of spiritual safety, like the universe is watching, but only mildly disappointed in you. Of course, if you have a single coin, you might try a tavern or alehouse, the medieval version of a truck stop. Warm, loud, and full of people who've also made poor life choices. You can't just walk in and sleep, though. You need to buy a drink. 1 cup of ale, nursed for hours, might buy you a spot by the hearth. Some innkeepers are kind and let you sleep on a bench for a story or a few pennies. Others will slam the door in your face with a satisfying creak. Inside, it's sticky, smoky, and shared with strangers who snore like war horses. But it's warm. And if you close your eyes tight enough, you can pretend the rats are just small, curious cats. When even the tavern turns you away, it's time for the ultimate gamble, begging for shelter. You pick a house that doesn't look like it belongs to a murderer, knock humbly, and plead for a corner by the fire. If you're lucky, a widow or a tired farmer takes pity and lets you in. You might get a meal, a place near the hearth, and a pile of rags that counts as a bed. In return, you chop wood, fetch water, or listen to complaints about the tax collector. But trust is fragile. Overstay your welcome, and you go from grateful guest to suspicious squatter by sunrise. Another clever option, the marketplace. By day, it's chaos. Shouting vendors, twitchy animals, questionable cheese. But by night, a ghost town of empty stalls and overturned carts. Tuck yourself under a counter, wrap up in your sack cloak, and you've got shelter from wind and rain. Plus, you're in the center of town. Up early, gone before the fishmongers arrive, swinging their slimy wares like weapons. The risks: night watchmen, stray dogs, and geese. Never underestimate medieval geese. They're loud, territorial, and hold grudges. If you're on a pilgrimage, heading to Canterbury, Santiago, or some obscure St. E's kneecap shrine, you've unlocked the medieval travel loyalty program. Pilgrim hostiles. Run by monks or pious locals, these religious guest houses offer shelter, soup, and a real bed. If you have a pilgrim's badge, no badge, you're just another vagrant with sore feet. Inside, you'll sleep on a straw mattress, eat vegetable soup that waved at a vegetable once, and pray at dawn. Misbehave, and you're out faster than a heretic at a bonfire. But for the desperate, these hostels are a blessing. One of the few places where safety and care aren't just dreams. For the bold and sneaky, there's the noble estate. You don't knock, you skulk. Behind the stables, near the manure heap, you find warmth from the animals and shelter from the wind. If you're quiet and invisible, you might get through the night without being chased off by a guard. Nobles sometimes allow peasants to stay briefly. It's good for their spiritual resume. But most travelers don't ask. They hide, they sleep, they leave before dawn. Because nothing ruins a noble's breakfast like finding a peasant snoring behind the compost pile. And then the jackpot. An abandoned building, a burnt-out cottage, a ruined mill, a ghost village left behind after the plague. It's collapsing, rat-infested, and almost certainly haunted, but it's free. No one cares. No one charges rent. You stuff straw in a corner, use your sack as a pillow, and hope the ghost of the last occupant is feeling generous. Sure, the wind howls like a banshee, and that goat staring at you at 3 a.m. might be possessed. But compared to sleeping in a puddle, this is paradise. And finally, the rarest shelter of all, a kind stranger. Not often, but every once in a while, someone sees your blistered feet, hears your story, and says, "All right, you can sleep near the pig. No feather bed, no roast goose. but a roof, a fire, and something vaguely edible. That's a medieval miracle. In return, you chop wood, scare off wolves, or pretend to care about their complaints about the tax collector. Word spreads of good folk. Old Marty near the river, Brother Anilm 2 valleys over. These aren't just names, they're whispers of hope scattered across the map. And if you make it through the night, if you survive the cold, the fleas, the geese, and the existential dread, you wake up not just alive, but wiser. You know which barns have soft straw, which shrines don't reek of goat urine, and which taverns watered down the ale less. You've learned the true meaning of hospitality. And when you finally return home, lice-infested, blistered, and spiritually deflated, you carry with you the quiet pride of someone who faced the medieval road and lived to tell the tale. Section 2. The language of power. Fashion in Tudor England. In the heart of Tudor England. Beneath the towering spires of Westminster and the shadow of Henry VIII's ever-watching portraits, there was a silent war being fought, not with swords or cannon, but with silk, starch, and sumptuary laws. Fashion in this era wasn't about style. It was about survival, status, and subjugation, a dazzling, dangerous code written in fabric where one wrong thread could mark you as a traitor to the crown. At the center of it all stood the sumptuary laws, not mere suggestions, but ironclad decrees from the monarchy that dictated exactly what you could wear based on your birth, wealth, and loyalty. These weren't fashion police, they were political enforcers. Want to wear velvet? Only if you were a noble, dream of purple. That sacred hue was reserved for royalty alone, a color so expensive, derived from thousands of Mediterranean shellfish, that wearing it without permission was an act of rebellion. Fur was ranked like soldiers, sable and lynx for the elite, rabbit for the commoner. Even your socks had a social class. To dress above your station wasn't vanity, it was a crime. And the Tudors didn't take fashion crimes lightly. But if the law was the foundation, the ruff was the crown jewel of Tudor absurdity. What began as a modest lace collar quickly ballooned into a rigid, starched halo that framed the face like a saint's. Though far less holy, a Elizabeth I's reign, ruffs were architectural feats, pleated, wired, stiffened with potato starch imported from the New World. They could span a foot in diameter, blocking peripheral vision and making it impossible to lean forward. A deliberate design. The ruff wasn't just a collar. It was a statement. I do not labor. I do not bow. I am above the dirt of this world. And woe to the noble caught with a wilted ruff. It meant poverty, laziness, or worse, a lack of servants to restarch it daily. Then came the slashed sleeves, a fashion born on battlefields, perfected in palaces. Picture this: a nobleman's doublet, carefully slashed in precise patterns, revealing a blaze of silk or velvet beneath. It looked like a crime scene, but it was pure propaganda. Each cut was a calculated waste, a way to flaunt not one, but two expensive fabrics. Only the obscenely wealthy could afford to destroy fine cloth just to show off what was underneath. It was clothing as theater, a flamboyant display of excess that screamed, I have so much, I can ruin it just to impress you. And when the sleeves weren't doing the talking, the jeweled gowns took the stage. For Tudor queens, a dress was never just a dress, it was a walking treasury. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, wore gowns so encrusted with pearls they shimmered like moonlight. Every gem was a symbol. Pearls for purity, rubies for passion, gold for divine right. These weren't clothes, they were armor, stitched with propaganda. Foreign ambassadors would write home in awe, describing her not as a woman, but as a living icon, a goddess draped in England's wealth and power. But no piece of Tudor fashion was quite as bold or as bizarre as the codpiece. What began as a modest flap of fabric to cover a gap in menace hose evolved into a padded, jeweled, and often comically oversized declaration of virility. Under Henry VIII, it became a symbol of royal dominance. A glittering, exaggerated bulge that turned the male groin into the centerpiece of the outfit. Whether to project strength, conceal illness, or simply intimidate rivals, the codpiece was fashion as power play. It said, without words, I rule not just the kingdom, but my own body. And color, in Tudor England, color was destiny. Crimson and scarlet, dyed with rare cochineal from the Americas, marked the nobility and the military elite. Black, though it looks somber to us, was a luxury, requiring layers of expensive dye to achieve its depth, worn by the powerful to project gravity and wealth. Green whispered of youth and fertility, blue honored the Virgin Mary, and gold was for gods and kings. To wear the wrong color wasn't a fashion faux pas, it was a political misstep. A whisper of ambition that could get you noticed by the wrong people. But fabric was just as important as color, the texture of power. Silk, imported from Italy in the East, shimmered like liquid light. Velvet, thick and plush, felt like authority made tangible. Satin and damask added layers of visual drama, while furs, sable, lynx, mink lined the cloaks of the elite like a second skin of privilege. Even linen and wool were graded. The finest bleached white for the nobility, coarse and brown for the peasants. In a world without ID cards, your clothes announced your rank before you spoke a word. And finally, the accessories. The finishing touches that turned a noble into a spectacle. Hats adorned with feathers and jewels, French hoods that framed a lady's face like a painting. Girdles heavy with gold chains, and shoes so wide and flat they were called duckbills. Elizabeth I dripped in pearls, not just on her gowns, but on her hats, her gloves, even her shoes. Every brooch, every buckle, every feather was a calculated move in the grand performance of power. So yes, Tudor fashion was extravagant. It was impractical. It was often ridiculous. But beneath the ruffs and codpieces, the slashed sleeves and jeweled gowns, was a truth as sharp as a tailor's shears. Clothes were not just worn, they were wielded. Every stitch was a sentence in a language of control. Every color, a command. Every fabric, a fortress. In Tudor England, to dress was to declare your place, or risk losing your head. Section 3. The vibrant life and multifaceted role of the medieval-era bazaar. To step into a medieval-era bazaar was not just a shop. It was to be swallowed whole by the soul of the city. In Cairo, Baghdad, and Damascus, the bazaar wasn't a side street or a weekend market. It was the living pulse of urban life, a labyrinth of sound, scent, and color where empires met, fortunes were made, and history unfolded not in palaces but between spice sacks and storytellers. Imagine the air, thick, warm, and layered like 1,000 whispered secrets. The aroma of spices and perfumes hit you first. Saffron from India, frankincense from Arabia, cinnamon from the Indonesian Isles, and cardamom that clung to your clothes like a blessing. These weren't just seasonings, they were medicine, luxury, diplomacy, and status. A single pouch of cloves could buy a man's freedom. A drop of musk from Central Asia was worth more than gold. Perfume sellers in carved wooden stalls offered rosewater from Persia and ambergris, carried on monsoon winds, their scents mingling with the smoky sweetness of lamb roasting on open fires. To breathe in the bazaar was to inhale the entire known world. And then came the explosion of color from textiles, a visual symphony that dazzled the eye. Rolls of Chinese silk shimmered like liquid light, unfurled by merchants with theatrical flair. Persian carpets woven with geometric precision and sacred patterns lay spread like gardens on the ground. Not just floor coverings, but heirlooms, prayer spaces, and symbols of power. Egyptian cotton, dyed in indigo and crimson, hung in vibrant bolts, while wool and linen served the everyday needs of the common people. Every fabric told a story of distant looms, camel caravans, crossing deserts, and sailors braving storms. To choose a cloth was to choose an identity, a bride's dowry, a noble's robe, a scholar's turban. In the bazaar, fabric was fate, and every thread was a connection to a wider world. But if the eyes feasted and the nose danced, the soundscape was a full-body experience. The air thrummed with life, a symphony of human voices, animal cries, and music that turned commerce into theater. Merchants bellowed their wares in rhythmic chants, fresh figs, sweet dates, the best saffron in Cairo. Haggling erupted like sudden fireworks, playful, fierce, and essential. A price wasn't stated, it was performed, a ritual of wit and respect. Between the stalls, musicians played the oud and ney, their melodies curling through the alleys like smoke. Snake charmers and acrobats drew crowds of children, while the dabka drums pulsed with the rhythm of the city. And above it all, the voice of the Hakawati, the storyteller, rose in a shaded courtyard. Spinning tales of Antor, the warrior, or the ever-unfolding 1001 Nights. These weren't just entertainments. They were the memory of a people, passed down in gasps and laughter, where a single story could teach a moral, preserve history, or spark a revolution. Yet beneath the beauty and noise, the bazaar was also a political arena, a place where power was watched, tested, and challenged. Rulers knew that to control the city, you had to control the market. Taxes were collected at every gate, funding armies, mosques, and palaces. The mutasib, the feared market inspector, patrolled with a sharp eye, checking weights and measures, punishing fraud, and ensuring that no butcher cheated a customer or a merchant sold rotten grain. Justice was public, immediate, and often harsh. A flogging here, a shuttered stall there. But the bazaar was also where whispers became revolutions. Sultans planted spies among the spice sellers. A careless joke about taxes or a muttered complaint about the governor could echo through the lanes and reach the palace by dusk. Processions of power began here. Edicts were read aloud. Boycotts could rise like storms. The bazaar was where the people spoke, not with swords, but with silence, with coin, with presence. And in this world of trade and tension, faith was never separate from life. It was woven into the very fabric of the bazaar. 5 times a day, the call to prayer rang from the minarets, and like magic, the market would pause. Stalls closed. Merchants rolled up their rugs. Men disappeared into mosques or prayer corners. Even the most urgent deal was set aside for God. Charity, too, was law and custom. The zakat, the obligatory alms, flowed from profits into public fountains, kitchens for the poor, and schools. Water sellers offered free cups to travelers. Butchers followed halal rules. Contracts began within the name of God. During Ramadan, the bazaar transformed into a nightly festival, lanterns glowing. Families shopping after the fast, sweet sellers displaying trays of honey-soaked pastries. On Eid, it erupted in joy. New clothes, perfumes, gifts, and banners fluttering in the wind. In the bazaar, to shop was to worship. To trade was to live in faith. For this was no isolated marketplace. The medieval era bazaar was a crossroads of civilizations, a global hub centuries before the word globalization existed. Persian traders in flowing robes sold carpets beside Indian merchants unloading spices. Greek and Italian merchants bartered glassware and wine. Caravans from Africa brought gold and ivory. From Central Asia came furs and horses. Arabic was the language of trade, but dozens of tongues echoed through the alleys. Diplomats came not to embassies, but to the bazaar, to gauge wealth and mood. And with goods came ideas. Booksellers in Baghdad sold translations of Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian poetry. Medical text from Alexandria could end up in Cordoba. An astronomical treatise from Samarkand might inspire a scholar in Cairo. The bazaar was a library without walls, where knowledge traveled as freely as silk. And yet, for all its grandeur, the bazaar was also a stage for everyday life, a place of laughter, gossip, and community. Men gathered in coffee houses, sipping cardamom-sweetened coffee, debating poetry, politics, or the latest palace scandal. Women, often accompanied by family, shopped for perfumes and fabrics, strengthening bonds and negotiating dowries. Street performers dazzled children. Families strolled during festivals, children clutching sweets, elders reminiscing. The bazaar wasn't just a marketplace. It was the theater of the medieval city, where people came not just to buy, but to be, to see, to be seen, to connect. So when the sun set and the lanterns flickered to life, when the last merchant packed away his scales and the storyteller closed his book, the legacy of the bazaar lingered. It wasn't just a market. It was the heart, mind, and soul of a civilization. A place where trade met truth, where spices carried stories. Where, in the swirl of a silk robe or the whisper of a prayer, the entire world came together, one transaction at a time. So we began with blistered feet in the mud of medieval Europe. A peasant with no coin, no bed, and no promise of safety. Just the cold comfort of a barn, a shrine, or the judgmental company of a goat. We walked that long, lonely road with them, where sleep was a gamble and kindness a rare miracle. Then we stepped into the glittering court of the Tudors, where every thread, every ruff, every absurdly oversized codpiece was a weapon in a silent war of status and survival. A world where wearing the wrong color could cost you your reputation, and where power wasn't just worn, it was woven into the very fabric of life. And finally, we entered the heart of the medieval Arab city, the Bazaar. A place where scent, sound, and soul collided. Where spices carried stories from distant lands, where storytellers held crowds in thrall, and where commerce, faith, and community weren't separate. They were inseparable. 3 worlds. 3 ways of living, surviving, being. And yet, if you listen closely, you hear the same heartbeat beneath them all. It's the sound of human resilience, of people making do, standing tall, or simply staying warm through the night. The peasant curling up beside a cow for warmth. The nobles stitching their power into a gown so heavy it could barely be worn. The merchant in Baghdad offering water to a stranger, not because they had to, but because it was right. These weren't just places. They were proof. Proof that even in a world without electricity, without maps, without safety nets, we built meaning. We built beauty. We built connection. And maybe that's the real lesson here. History isn't just about kings and battles and dates we memorize. It's about where we slept, what we wore, and who we shared our bread with. It's about the choices we made when no one was watching, and the ones we made when the whole world was. So the next time you pull back your covers, zip up your jacket, or walk through a market, pause for just a second. Think of the hands that came before yours, the feet that walked farther than they ever wanted to, the voices that bargained, prayed, laughed, and told stories under lantern light. Because history isn't in a book, it's in the way we live. It's in the clothes we wear, the shelters we seek, and the markets where we meet. And if we're lucky, we'll carry a little bit of that medieval soul with us, in every step, every stitch, and every shared moment. Thank you for being here tonight, for listening, for reflecting, and for joining this journey across time. If this resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you liked, subscribed, and most of all, told a friend. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. What time is it there? What part of tonight's journey stayed with you the most? Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and maybe, just maybe, appreciate your mattress a little more. Good night.